Mike Tyson walked into his gym late one night expecting silence, but instead he found something unusual. His attention was caught by a young janitor hitting a heavy bag with raw talent and undeniable determination. What Tyson learned about the janitor's life and what he did next shocked everyone. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The gym was quiet, its vast space dimly lit by overhead lights that cast long shadows across the polished floor. The echoes of the day's hustle, grunts of effort, the rhythmic pounding of fists on heavy bags, and the occasional sharp bark of a coach's orders had long since faded. Now, the silence was broken only by the occasional squeak of sneakers against the floor and the rhythmic swish of a mop moving methodically back and forth. Jason worked quickly but with care, his lean frame moving with a quiet efficiency born of long hours and endless routines. The smell of cleaning fluid hung in the air as he wiped down equipment, his calloused hands rough from years of labor. He paused for a moment, leaning on the mop handle, and glanced around the gym. The rows of punching bags hung still, the speed bags motionless in their cradles. He felt the weight of the emptiness and something else, a pang of longing that gnawed at him every time he stepped into this space. Jason wasn't just a cleaner. He was a young man with a past that felt like a distant dream. Years ago, when he was a teenager, he had spent hours in gyms like this, sweating and training, fueled by dreams of becoming a professional boxer. He had talent. Everyone said so. But life had other plans. His father's sudden death had changed everything. Overnight, Jason had become the man of the house, responsible for his grieving mother and his two younger brothers. There was no room for boxing when bills had to be paid, mouths had to be fed, and a family had to be held together. He had dropped out of school, taken a job as a warehouse loader during the day, and picked up shifts as a cleaner at night. Boxing became a distant memory, a what if he didn't have the luxury to entertain. Yet something about being in this gym kept that spark alive. As he finished mopping the floor, Jason's eyes lingered on the heavy bag in the corner. He set the mop aside and walked toward it, almost involuntarily. His fingers traced the worn leather, and he felt a familiar pull, as if the bag itself was calling to him. He glanced around the gym, reassuring himself that he was alone, then picked up a pair of old gloves left behind in the corner. The gloves were cracked and frayed, their padding worn thin from years of use, but they felt like home when he slid his hands into them. Jason stood in front of the bag, adjusting his stance, his feet instinctively finding their rhythm. He began to jab at the bag lightly, the movements rusty but still precise. His punches grew stronger, sharper, as muscle memory took over. The bag swung in response, and Jason lost himself in the rhythm of his strikes. Each hit a release of pent-up frustration and dreams deferred. He didn't hear the door open or the faint creak of sneakers against the floor. He didn't notice the shadow that moved along the far wall, growing closer. It wasn't until he landed a particularly solid hook that a low, deliberate clap echoed through the gym. Jason froze, his hands dropping to his sides, his heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. Turning slowly, he saw him. Mike Tyson. The heavyweight legend stood near the entrance, his imposing frame silhouetted against the light. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He had seen Mike around the gym before, of course. It was his gym, after all, but their paths had never crossed like this. Mike took a few steps closer, his expression unreadable. Jason scrambled to pull off the gloves, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. I was just finishing up cleaning, and I thought..." Mike raised a hand, silencing him with a calm but commanding gesture. "Relax," he said, his voice low and steady. "I wasn't going to stop you. I was watching." He tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes studying Jason. "You've got a good jab." Jason blinked, unsure how to respond. He felt a mix of embarrassment and pride, but mostly disbelief. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name?" Mike asked, stepping closer. "Jason," he replied. "Jason Harris." Mike nodded, his gaze still fixed on him. "You used to box?" Jason hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, a while ago. Before." He trailed off, unsure how much to share. "Before what?" Mike pressed, his tone gentle but insistent. Jason sighed, looking down at the gloves in his hands. "Before my dad passed, I had to stop. My family needed me to work, so I took a job at the warehouse, and now I clean here at night." Mike crossed his arms, his expression softening as he listened. "That's tough," he said. "But you still got it. I could see it in your punches." Jason shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know about that. It's been years, and even when I was training, I never got far. Most of the coaches didn't take me seriously. Said I didn't have the look or the connections." Mike's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean, the look?" Jason hesitated, then sighed. "They meant my skin, my background. I'm just a kid from the neighborhood. They didn't think I had what it takes." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Mike stepped closer, his voice firm but encouraging. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do because of who you are or where you're from. I've been there. I know what it's like, and I know it doesn't have to stop you." Jason looked up, meeting Mike's gaze. There was something in the legend's eyes, conviction, belief, and a strength that felt unshakable. It was the kind of belief Jason hadn't felt in himself for a long time. "You ever think about getting back in the ring?" Mike asked, his tone light but his question heavy with possibility. Jason hesitated. The thought had crossed his mind 1,000 times, but it always felt like a distant fantasy. "I don't know," he said finally. "It's been so long, and with my schedule—" Mike cut him off with a slight shake of his head. "Excuses," he said simply. "You got heart, I can see that. And talent. All you need is a chance." Jason felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to believe Mike's words, but the weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him. "It's not just about me," he said quietly. "I've got a family to take care of." Mike nodded slowly, understanding. "Family's important," he said, "but so are you. Think about it, Jason. You've got something special. Don't waste it." With that, Mike gave him a final nod and turned toward the door. Jason stood there, the gloves still in his hands, watching the heavyweight champion walk away. For the first time in years, a tiny flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his story. Jason hesitated outside the gym the next evening, his hand lingering on the door handle. The weight of the day clung to him like a heavy coat. His shift at the warehouse had been brutal, unloading pallets of supplies, lifting box after box until his arms screamed for rest. His co-workers had teased him about falling asleep on his lunch break, not knowing he had worked a night shift cleaning the gym just hours earlier. Now, standing in front of the same place he scrubbed floors in the dark, Jason felt out of place. This wasn't where he belonged, was it? He glanced through the glass door and saw the brightly lit interior. Inside, boxers were training, their punches sharp, their movements fluid. Coaches barked orders, and the rhythmic sound of gloves striking bags filled the air. They all looked confident, sure of their place here. Jason felt like an imposter. But then he remembered Mike Tyson's words from the night before. "You've got heart and talent. All you need is a chance." Taking a deep breath, Jason pushed open the door. The familiar smell of sweat, leather, and determination hit him instantly. He stepped inside, his work boots clunking awkwardly against the floor. Heads turned as he entered, some glances curious, others indifferent. Jason felt the heat rise to his face, but he kept moving, heading toward the corner where Mike Tyson stood, his arms crossed as he watched two fighters spar in the ring. Mike noticed Jason immediately and gave him a small nod. "You came," he said, his tone approving. "Good." Jason forced a smile. "Yeah, I figured. Why not?" Mike smirked. "Why not, huh? Let's see what you've got." He motioned for Jason to follow him to the far side of the gym where an old heavy bag hung, worn from years of punishment. "Put these on," Mike said, tossing him a pair of gloves. They weren't the cracked, frayed pair Jason had used the night before. These were newer, heavier, and felt strangely intimidating in his hands. Jason slid the gloves on, the familiar weight settling over him. He adjusted the straps nervously as Mike positioned himself nearby, arms still crossed, watching intently. "Show me a jab," Mike said simply. Jason nodded, stepping into position. His feet found their rhythm and he snapped his left hand forward, striking the bag with a sharp pop. "Not bad," Mike said. "Do it again. Keep that hand up." Jason adjusted his guard and threw another jab, then another, each one more deliberate than the last. Mike's sharp eye caught every small detail: the angle of Jason's wrist, the placement of his feet, the tension in his shoulders. "Your stance is decent, but you're a little stiff," Mike said, stepping closer. "Relax your shoulders. Let your punches flow." He placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, gently pressing down. "There. Now, try." Jason followed the instruction, and the difference was immediate. His jab felt smoother, more natural. He glanced at Mike, who nodded approvingly. "That's better," Mike said. "Now throw a 1-2. Jason complied, adding a right cross after his jab. The bag shuddered under the force of his punches. He felt a small surge of pride, but quickly buried it, not wanting to seem arrogant. Mike stepped back, watching him for a moment before speaking again. "You've got power, Jason. But power's nothing if you don't have control. That's what we're going to work on." Jason spent the next hour drilling combinations under Mike's watchful eye. Every time he made a mistake, Mike corrected him, his instructions precise and sometimes brutal in their honesty. "You're leaning too far forward. You'll eat an uppercut if you do that in a real fight. Your right hand's dropping when you jab. Don't give your opponent a target." By the end of the session, Jason's arms felt like lead. His shirt was soaked with sweat and his legs wobbled with exhaustion. But despite the fatigue, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. As he pulled off the gloves, Mike handed him a water bottle. "Good work," he said simply. Jason took a long drink, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "Thanks," he said, his voice hoarse. Mike studied him for a moment. "You've got a lot of potential, Jason, but it's not going to be easy. You've got a lot to learn, and it's going to take time." Jason nodded, the weight of the words sinking in. "I'm ready to work," he said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Mike gave him a rare smile. "That's what I like to hear." The next few weeks followed a similar pattern. Jason would arrive at the gym after his shift at the warehouse, his body already tired but his mind determined. Mike put him through grueling drills, focusing on fundamentals, footwork, defense, combinations. Jason struggled at first, his movements rusty and unrefined, but with each session, he improved. During one particularly tough session, Jason opened up to Mike about his past. He told him about the racist comments he'd heard from coaches when he was younger, about how they dismissed him because of his background and his family's struggles. He admitted that those words had stuck with him, making him doubt himself even when he knew he had talent. Mike listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When Jason finished, Mike spoke, his voice low but firm. "Let me tell you something, Jason. People are always going to try to put you in a box, tell you what you can and can't do. But that's their problem, not yours. You're here now. You've got a shot. Don't waste it." Jason nodded, his chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and determination. For the first time in years, he felt like someone believed in him, not just his skills, but in him as a person. Despite his progress in the gym, Jason's life outside of it remained a challenge. His shifts at the warehouse were long and physically demanding, and his work as a cleaner often left him too tired to focus during training. One evening, after noticing Jason's sluggish movements, Mike pulled him aside. "You can't keep this up," Mike said bluntly. "You're burning yourself out." Jason shrugged. "What choice do I have? My family needs the money." Mike studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, leave it with me." The next day, Mike made a few phone calls. By the end of the week, Jason had a new job, still physical, but with fewer hours and better pay. It wasn't much, but it gave him just enough breathing room to focus more on his training. The difference was immediate. Jason's punches became sharper, his footwork more precise. His confidence grew, not just in the gym, but in himself. He was still tired, still juggling more responsibilities than any one person should have to, but he was fighting again, not just in the ring, but for his future. And for the first time in a long time, he believed he could win. Jason paced nervously in the locker room, his footsteps echoing off the cold concrete walls. His fists already taped, clenched and unclenched reflexively as he tried to calm the storm brewing in his chest. The muffled roar of the crowd seeped through the walls, a mix of cheers, whistles, and the dull thud of gloves meeting flesh from the ongoing bouts. He had trained for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, doubt gnawed at him. Mike Tyson entered the room, his presence immediately grounding Jason. Dressed casually in a tracksuit, he carried an aura of calm authority that Jason envied. Mike had been there, done that, and conquered it all. Jason, by contrast, felt like a child stepping into a world too big for him. "You ready?" Mike asked, his voice low but steady. Jason nodded, though his expression betrayed his uncertainty. "Yeah, I think so." Mike stepped closer, his sharp eyes locking onto Jason's. "Don't think. No. You've put in the work. You've earned this. Now go out there and show them." Jason swallowed hard, nodding again. He wanted to believe those words, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him. This wasn't just a fight. It was a chance to prove that he belonged, to silence the voices that had told him he didn't. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Harris, you're up," a voice called. Mike clapped Jason on the shoulder. "Let's go." The walk to the ring felt like a dream. The noise grew louder with every step, the crowd's energy palpable. As Jason emerged from the tunnel, the bright lights of the arena hit him, momentarily blinding him. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the spectacle. The ring stood in the center, its ropes taut and gleaming under the lights. Around it, hundreds of faces stared, some curious, others disinterested. He spotted a few smirks among them, and his stomach churned. His opponent was already in the ring, a stocky white fighter named Tyler Grady. Tyler was the favorite, a local up-and-comer with a string of amateur wins under his belt. He stood confidently, his gloves resting on the top rope as he eyed Jason with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Jason climbed into the ring, his movements stiff. The referee called them to the center, reciting the rules while they stared each other down. Tyler leaned in slightly, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Hope you're ready for a beating," he muttered. Jason said nothing, his jaw tightening. He had heard worse, but it still stung. The bell rang and the fight began. Tyler came out aggressively, throwing quick jabs and trying to corner Jason early. Jason moved defensively, keeping his guard high and circling the ring. His nerves were still raw and his timing felt off. Tyler landed a solid jab to Jason's ribs, then another to his head. The crowd roared with approval. In the corner, Mike's voice cut through the noise. "Breathe, Jason. Stick to the basics." Jason focused on his breathing, steadying himself. He began to find his rhythm, using his jab to create distance. He blocked Tyler's next few attempts and countered with a sharp hook to the body. Tyler grunted, his confidence faltering slightly. As the rounds progressed, the fight became a battle of wills. Tyler relied on brute force, throwing heavy punches that Jason dodged or absorbed with his guard. Jason, meanwhile, used his footwork and patience, waiting for openings. In the third round, he landed a clean uppercut that snapped Tyler's head back, drawing gasps from the crowd. By the fourth round, both fighters were visibly fatigued. Jason's muscles ached, his arms felt like lead, but he pushed forward. Tyler's punches grew sloppier, his frustration evident. Jason seized the opportunity, landing a series of quick jabs followed by a powerful right cross that sent Tyler stumbling back. The bell rang, ending the fight. Both fighters returned to their corners, breathing heavily. Jason glanced at Mike, who nodded approvingly. "You did good," Mike said. "Now let's see what the judges say." The referee called both fighters to the center of the ring. Jason's heart pounded as the announcer took the microphone, his voice booming over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, after 4 rounds of boxing, we go to the judges' scorecards. The winner, by unanimous decision." Jason held his breath, his eyes darting between the announcer and the referee. "Tyler Grady." The crowd erupted into cheers, though some booed in protest. Jason felt a wave of disappointment crash over him as the referee raised Tyler's hand. Tyler smirked, throwing a cocky glance at Jason before retreating to his corner. Jason stood there, trying to process the loss. He had fought hard, given everything he had, but it hadn't been enough. As he walked back to his corner, the applause from a few pockets of the crowd caught his attention. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering for him. They had seen his effort, his heart, even if the judges hadn't rewarded it. Back in the locker room, Jason sank onto a bench, his head in his hands. Mike sat beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. "You did good out there." Jason looked up, his expression pained. "I lost." Mike shook his head. "You didn't lose. You learned. That's the first step. You showed them what you're made of. Now, you take what you learned tonight and use it. Every great fighter's got losses. It's what you do after that counts." Jason nodded slowly, the words sinking in. He had fought with everything he had, and though he hadn't won, he had proven something to himself. He belonged in the ring. As they left the gym that night, Jason glanced back at the arena. He knew there would be more fights, more challenges, and more opportunities. And this time, he wouldn't let doubt hold him back. Jason's body ached as he stepped into the gym the morning after his debut fight. The soreness was a painful reminder of every punch he had thrown and taken the night before. He moved stiffly, his ribs tender and his knuckles bruised, but his mind was sharper than ever. Despite the loss, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride. He had stepped into the ring, faced a formidable opponent, and held his own. He belonged there. Mike Tyson was waiting for him near the speed bags, his broad shoulders relaxed as he casually punched a bag with effortless rhythm. When he saw Jason, he stopped, giving him a small nod. "You showed heart last night," Mike said, his voice steady. "But heart's not enough. You ready to get back to work?" Jason hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." Mike's lips curled into a faint smile. "Good, then let's start." The next few weeks were grueling. Mike doubled down on Jason's training, pushing him harder than ever before. Early morning runs turned into long sprints, and sparring sessions became tests of endurance and strategy. Mike focused on refining Jason's weaknesses: his footwork, his defense, and his timing. Every mistake Jason made was corrected with brutal honesty. "Keep your chin down or you'll get knocked out," Mike barked during one sparring session as Jason narrowly dodged a hook from his partner. "Don't just throw punches. Think," he shouted another time when Jason missed an opening to counter. The corrections were harsh, but Jason absorbed them. He could see the improvement in himself with each session. His punches were crisper, his movements more deliberate. He began to feel the rhythm of the sport again, the way it flowed through his body like second nature. Outside the gym, Jason's life remained as challenging as ever. His new job provided more flexibility, but it didn't eliminate his financial struggles. His mother still relied on him to help with bills, and his younger brothers looked up to him as their role model. Balancing his responsibilities at home with his growing commitment to boxing was a constant challenge. Late one evening, after a particularly tough day, Jason sat on the edge of his bed, his hands trembling from exhaustion. His mother entered the room, her face lined with worry. "Jason," she said softly, sitting beside him, "you're pushing yourself too hard." "I'm fine, Mom," Jason replied, though the fatigue in his voice betrayed him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know you're doing this for us, but you need to take care of yourself, too. Your father would have wanted you to follow your dreams." Jason looked at her, surprised by her words. "It's not just about my dreams," he said. "I want to make things better for all of us." "And you are," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "But don't lose yourself in the process." Her words stayed with him, a reminder that his fight wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and deeply personal. A few months later, Jason was back in the ring, this time for another amateur fight. His opponent was tougher, a seasoned fighter with a reputation for overwhelming his opponents with sheer aggression. But Jason was ready. He had learned from his first fight, and Mike had drilled into him the importance of strategy. When the bell rang, Jason moved with confidence. He stayed light on his feet, using his improved footwork to stay out of his opponent's reach. He landed precise jabs, each one chipping away at the other fighter's defenses. The crowd roared as the fight intensified, Jason's punches growing sharper and more calculated with every round. By the final bell, Jason stood victorious, his hand raised high as the announcer declared him the winner. The feeling was surreal, a mix of relief and exhilaration. In the locker room afterward, Mike clapped him on the back. "That's how it's done," Mike said, his grin wide. "You didn't just win, you fought smart." Jason couldn't help but smile, the sting of his first loss fading in the glow of his victory. But Mike wasn't one to let him rest on his laurels. "Enjoy it tonight," he said, "but tomorrow we're back at it. You've got more to prove." Word of Jason's talent began to spread. Local promoters started noticing him, and his name began to appear on fight cards with increasing frequency. His story of a young man who had faced adversity, supported his family, and fought his way back into the ring resonated with audiences. People began showing up to his fights, drawn by his grit and determination. Jason's victories piled up, but with them came new challenges. The opponents grew tougher, their skills sharper. Some fighters tried to intimidate him with trash talk and mind games, others with brute force. But Jason remained focused, his resolve unshakable. He had spent too long fighting against the odds to let fear or doubt creep in now. As his career gained momentum, so did the scrutiny. Articles about him appeared online, some celebrating his rise, others questioning whether he had what it took to make it to the professional level. Jason also faced criticism rooted in the same prejudice he had experienced as a teenager. Online forums and social media posts sometimes dismissed him, attributing his success to luck rather than skill. One evening, as Jason scrolled through comments on a recent article about his latest fight, he stumbled upon a particularly cruel remark. "He's not a real boxer, just another guy trying to play hero. Let's see how far he gets before he quits." The words stung, but Jason closed his laptop, refusing to let them distract him. He reminded himself of Mike's advice. "Don't let anyone else define you. You know what you're capable of." Jason's defining moment came during a regional tournament. The stakes were higher than ever, the competition fierce. His final match was against a highly touted favorite, a fighter with an undefeated record and the confidence to match. The arena buzzed with anticipation as the two fighters faced off, their contrasting styles on full display. The fight was brutal, a test of endurance and willpower. Jason absorbed punishing blows but refused to back down. In the final round, with both fighters exhausted, Jason dug deep, finding a reserve of strength he hadn't known he possessed. He landed a series of clean, devastating punches that left his opponent dazed. When the final bell rang, the crowd erupted into cheers. The judges awarded Jason the victory by unanimous decision. As he stood in the center of the ring, his hand raised in triumph, he scanned the crowd and saw his mother and brothers, their faces beaming with pride. Mike stood nearby, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. That night, as Jason sat in the quiet of his home, the weight of his journey settled over him. He had come so far, but he knew the road ahead would be even tougher. Still, for the first time in years, he felt ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his family, his future, and every person who had ever been told they couldn't achieve their dreams. And he wasn't done yet. The bright lights of the arena felt hotter than usual, and the murmurs of the crowd outside Jason's locker room buzzed like a distant storm. He sat on the wooden bench, wrapping his hands in tape with a practiced precision. Each loop around his knuckles was a ritual, a grounding force as his mind raced. The upcoming fight wasn't just any fight. It was the biggest bout of his career so far. The winner would gain a spot in the national rankings, a crucial step toward going pro. Mike Tyson stood across the room, his arms crossed as he observed Jason's preparations. He hadn't said much, which was unusual. Normally, Mike would be full of advice, instructions, and motivational quips, but tonight, his silence was telling. He knew how much was at stake, and so did Jason. You good? Mike finally asked, breaking the tension. Jason nodded, though his stomach churned. Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Mike walked over and crouched down to meet Jason's eyes. Look, pressure's part of the game. Everyone out there's got something to prove. But you've already proven more than they'll ever understand. Don't let the noise get to you. Jason took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. He finished taping his hands and rose to his feet, bouncing lightly to shake off the nerves. I'm ready, he said, though his voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. Good, Mike replied, because it's time. The crowd roared as Jason entered the arena, the noise a cacophony of cheers, jeers, and anticipation. The ring looked smaller under the blinding lights, a tight square of destiny where everything he had worked for would be tested. Across from him stood his opponent, Marcus Kane, a seasoned amateur with an undefeated record. Marcus exuded confidence, his muscular frame and sharp movements signaling a fighter who knew his worth. Jason climbed into the ring, his heart pounding as the referee called them to the center. Marcus stared him down, his smirk dripping with arrogance. You don't belong here, Marcus muttered as the referee went over the rules. Go back to cleaning gyms. The words hit Jason like a gut punch, but he didn't flinch. He had heard it all before. The doubts, the dismissals. He met Marcus's gaze and let his silence speak for him. The bell rang and the fight began. Marcus came out fast, his punches sharp and calculated. Jason dodged and blocked as best he could, but Marcus's experience showed. By the end of the first round, Jason was on the defensive, his ribs aching from a series of brutal body shots. In the corner, Mike leaned in close, his voice calm but firm. You're letting him dictate the fight. Stick to your game plan. Use your jab, keep moving. Don't let him back you into a corner. Jason nodded, spitting into the bucket beside him before the bell rang for the second round. He stepped back into the ring with renewed focus, his movements more deliberate. He jabbed at Marcus, keeping him at bay, and landed a clean right cross that drew cheers from the crowd. Marcus retaliated with a flurry of punches, but Jason weathered the storm, his defense holding strong. By the third round, the fight was a battle of wills. Marcus began to slow, his punches losing their sting. Jason, fueled by sheer determination, pressed the attack. He landed a series of punishing hooks, each one driving Marcus further into the ropes. The crowd erupted as Jason took control, his energy surging as he realized he could win this. Then, in the fourth round, disaster struck. Marcus feigned a retreat, luring Jason in, and countered with a vicious uppercut that sent Jason sprawling to the canvas. The world spun as he hit the mat, the referee's voice counting in the background. 1, 2, 3. Jason blinked, the sound of the crowd muffled like he was underwater. He thought of his mother, his brothers, and everything he had sacrificed to get here. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to his feet before the count of 8. The referee checked him over and let the fight continue. Marcus came at him again, smelling blood, but Jason refused to go down. He dug deep, finding a reserve of strength he hadn't known he had. With less than 30 seconds left in the round, Jason unleashed a combination that caught Marcus off guard. A jab, a hook, and a devastating right cross that sent Marcus staggering into the ropes. The bell rang, ending the round, but the tide had turned. In the fifth and final round, Jason fought like a man possessed. His punches were precise, his movements fluid. He dominated the ring, forcing Marcus to retreat again and again. The crowd was on its feet, chanting Jason's name as the seconds ticked down. When the final bell rang, Jason stepped back, his chest heaving as he raised his gloves in triumph. The referee brought both fighters to the center, their faces battered, their bodies bruised. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, after 5 rounds of boxing, we go to the judges' scorecards. The winner, by unanimous decision." Jason held his breath, his entire world balancing on the next words. "Jason Harris." The arena erupted into cheers as the referee raised Jason's hand. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked out at the crowd, his vision blurring. He had done it. He had proven that he belonged. In the locker room afterward, Jason sat on the bench, his body exhausted but his spirit soaring. Mike sat beside him, a rare smile on his face. "You earned that," Mike said simply. Jason nodded, still catching his breath. "I couldn't have done it without you." Mike shook his head. "You had it in you all along. I just helped you see it." Jason leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the reality of what he had accomplished began to sink in. He was no longer just a kid from a tough neighborhood, a cleaner, a warehouse worker. He was a fighter, a competitor, and a man who refused to let the world define him. But he knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would only get harder, the opponents tougher, the stakes higher. And Jason was ready for it. He had fought his way through the fire and come out stronger. As he left the arena that night, his family waiting for him outside with beaming smiles and open arms, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope for a future he could build with his own 2 hands, for a life that was his to shape. And as he looked ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done fighting yet. The months following Jason's triumph in the regional tournament were a whirlwind of activity. His name began appearing more frequently in boxing circles, and his fights drew larger and more enthusiastic crowds. What had started as a dream slowly turned into a reality. Jason Harris was no longer just a contender. He was a rising star. But success came with its own challenges. The pressure to perform grew with every fight. Reporters sought interviews, fans clamored for his time, and sponsors began to show interest. Jason, however, kept his focus. Every time he felt overwhelmed, he returned to the same thought. This isn't just for me. His family's faces, their pride and belief in him, kept him grounded. Jason stood in the middle of a packed arena, moments before the fight that would determine his future as a professional. The air buzzed with anticipation. Tonight, he wasn't just fighting for a title. He was fighting for a chance to redefine his story and the stories of those who looked up to him. His opponent, Diego El Toro Ramirez, was a powerhouse, a bruiser with a reputation for dismantling his opponents with raw aggression. Ramirez had mocked Jason in the press in the weeks leading up to the fight, calling him a lucky charity case. Jason hadn't responded, choosing to let his fists do the talking. Still, the words lingered in his mind, fueling his determination. As Jason prepared in the locker room, Mike Tyson stood beside him, his presence as steady as ever. The two had developed a bond deeper than mentorship. Mike had become a father figure Jason never knew he needed. "You're ready," Mike said, his voice calm. "All those hours, all that sweat, it's for this moment. Trust yourself." Jason nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. He could hear the muffled chants of the crowd. His name was among them now, called out by people who believed in him. He closed his eyes, letting the noise wash over him, and took a deep breath. The opening bell rang, and the fight began. Ramirez charged forward immediately, throwing wild, punishing hooks designed to intimidate. Jason stayed calm, his movements calculated. He let Ramirez expend his energy in the early rounds, focusing on defense and using his footwork to avoid unnecessary punishment. By the third round, Ramirez's frustration was evident. Jason began to pick him apart with sharp jabs and well-timed counters, using the openings created by Ramirez's over-aggression. The crowd roared as Jason landed a clean combination, a jab, a right hook, and a left uppercut that sent Ramirez stumbling backward. The fight continued, each round testing Jason's endurance and strategy. In the seventh, Ramirez landed a powerful blow to Jason's ribs, sending a shockwave of pain through his body. Jason staggered but refused to go down. He could hear Mike's voice in his corner, "Stay focused. Stick to the plan." Drawing on his training, Jason recovered and returned fire, landing a punishing body shot that left Ramirez gasping for air. The momentum shifted back in Jason's favor, and he pressed the attack, his punches finding their mark with brutal precision. In the 10th and final round, the arena was electric. Both fighters were battered, their faces swollen and bruised, but neither was willing to back down. Jason dug deep, summoning every ounce of strength and determination he had left. With less than 30 seconds on the clock, he unleashed a flurry of punches that culminated in a devastating right cross. Ramirez crumpled to the mat, and the referee began the count. 1, 2, 3. Ramirez struggled to rise, but his legs gave out. By the count of 10, it was over. The referee waved his arms, signaling Jason's victory. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers as Jason fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the moment. After the fight, Jason stood in the center of the ring, the championship belt slung over his shoulder. Reporters swarmed the ring, microphones and cameras capturing every word. Jason thanked his family, his team, and Mike, his voice breaking with emotion as he spoke about the journey that had brought him here. "This isn't just my victory," he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "It's for everyone who's been told they're not good enough, that they don't belong. It's for my family, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And it's for every kid out there with a dream. Keep fighting for it. Don't let anyone tell you it's impossible." Jason's victory cemented his place in the boxing world, but he knew his journey didn't end there. Inspired by his own struggles, he decided to give back to his community. With Mike's guidance, he opened a gym in his old neighborhood, a place where kids from underprivileged backgrounds could train for free. The gym wasn't just about boxing. It was a sanctuary, a space where young people could find mentorship, discipline, and hope. Jason became a vocal advocate for social change, using his platform to highlight issues like systemic racism and inequality. His story resonated far beyond the boxing ring, inspiring people from all walks of life to persevere against the odds. Years later, Jason stood ringside at his gym, watching a group of kids spar. One boy, no older than 14, reminded him of himself, determined, scrappy, and full of potential. Jason walked over, offering a few pointers as the boy nodded eagerly. Mike Tyson approached, his grin wide. "Looks like you've got the next champ right there." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe. But first, he's got to learn the basics." He glanced at Mike, his expression softening. "Kinda like someone else I know." Mike laughed, clapping him on the back. "You've done good, Jason, real good." Jason looked around the gym, at the kids laughing and training, at the families who had found a sense of community there. He thought of his journey, from scrubbing floors to standing under the arena lights, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. His fight had been about more than titles and trophies. It had been about proving that no matter where you come from, no matter how many obstacles stand in your way, you can rise. And now he was helping others do the same. As Jason laced up a pair of gloves and stepped into the ring to spar with the young boy, he smiled. His journey wasn't over. It had just taken on a new purpose. The legacy he was building wasn't just his own. It belonged to everyone he had inspired along the way. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you liked it, support our channel. Subscribe so you don't miss new inspirational videos. Share this video with your friends so it can inspire them too. And don't forget to check out our channel for more incredible stories.